They left a dead puppy in an empty parking lot, but a stray cat did the unthinkable. What if the stray cat who witnessed the horror wasn't just a random bystander, but held the key to a secret hidden in that empty parking lot? You think it's a simple story of compassion, but a shocking twist reveals the real reason the cat sought out Martha that fateful night. Subscribe, like, and listen now to uncover the full story of Compassion in the Dark. The first thump echoed unnaturally loud in the cavernous emptiness of the asphalt expanse. It wasn't the benign sound of a dropped bag or a slamming car door. It was wet, solid, followed by a sharp, high-pitched yelp that sliced through the damp night air before being abruptly cut off. Then another thump, and another. Gravel skittered across the pavement under the harsh, intermittent glare of a faulty sodium vapor lamp buzzing overhead like a dying insect. A shadow detached itself from a hulking pickup truck, parked askew near the overflowing dumpster enclosure. The shape resolved into a man, broad-shouldered, his movements jerky with unrestrained fury. His arm swung down again, a thick work boot connecting with something small and pale near the base of the dumpster. A whimper, thin as a thread, tried to rise but was instantly silenced by another vicious impact. The air crackled with a violence that felt alien and obscene under the indifferent suburban sky. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the man's ragged breathing. He spat onto the pavement near the small, unmoving heap. A low curse rumbled in his chest, aimed at the still form, at the world, at nothing in particular. He wiped his boot deliberately on a patch of cleaner asphalt, then turned, his face obscured by shadow and distance, and climbed back into the truck. The engine roared to life, tires squealing slightly as he pulled out of the parking lot, leaving behind only the stench of exhaust fumes and a profound, chilling stillness. Near the dumpster, a patch of dirty white fur lay stark against the dark, oil-stained ground. It didn't move. It didn't twitch. The buzzing street lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe around the small body like specters drawn to the sudden, brutal cessation of life. The vast, empty parking lot held the scene in a pocket of cold indifference. No sirens wailed, no doors opened. The violence had happened, swift and terrible, and now it was over, swallowed by the night, leaving only a small broken sacrifice on the altar of someone's inexplicable rage. The air itself felt bruised, holding its breath, waiting. But waiting for what? The question hung unanswered in the suffocating silence. From the deepest shadows beneath a skeletal, long-abandoned shopping cart, a pair of wide, luminous green eyes watched. They belonged to Rusty, a creature of the margins, a tomcat whose patchy orange fur bore the testament of countless territorial skirmishes and lean seasons. This parking lot, bordering a strip mall that had seen better days and a quiet residential street, was his domain. A complex map of hunting grounds, hiding spots, and the occasional unpredictable bounty of discarded human food. He knew the rhythms of the place, the morning rush of commuters cutting through, the lunchtime trickle from the nearby deli, the evening exodus, and finally, the deep quiet of the night, punctuated by the rumble of distant highways and the scuttling of smaller nocturnal life. He'd seen the puppy earlier, a newcomer, scared, ribs showing, nosing hopefully around the same dumpster the man had guarded with such savage possessiveness. Rusty had watched it with detached curiosity, another transient soul navigating the harsh realities of their shared world. He'd felt no kinship, only the wary acknowledgement of another competitor for scarce resources. He'd certainly felt no inclination to intervene when the man's truck had screeched into the lot, the driver emerging with a face like thunder, shouting about a spilled container of leftover Chinese food. Rusty had melted back into the darkness, instinct screaming self-preservation. He had witnessed violence before, the swift, brutal finality of catfights, the swoop of an owl, the terrifying speed of cars. But this had been different, slower, colder, utterly senseless. The sheer malice radiating from the man had been a physical force, freezing the air. Now, the parking lot was silent again, save for the omnipresent buzz of the failing light. The man was gone. The puppy was a still, silent shape. Fear kept Rusty pinned beneath the cart, muscles coiled, ready to bolt. But something else stirred within him, an unease that went beyond the instinct to flee. It was the profound wrongness of the scene, the lingering scent of adrenaline and blood, the stark silence where there should have been movement, whimpers, life. He crept out slowly, low to the ground, ears flattened, eyes scanning the empty lot. He approached the dumpster cautiously, the coppery smell stronger now. He saw the puppy clearly under the flickering light. Still, so terribly still. He wasn't guided by empathy in the human sense, but by a primal disturbance. This unnatural stillness, this scent of death and violence, was a danger signal. It contaminated his territory. And perhaps, deep in the complex wiring of a stray's brain, there was a flicker of association. Across the street, lights glowed warmly in the windows of the small houses lining Maple Avenue. One house in particular was a known quantity. An old female human lived there. Sometimes late at night she put out scraps. Not often, not reliably, but sometimes. She spoke softly. Her movements were slow, predictable, safe. The disturbance in the parking lot, the wrongness, somehow connected to the memory of potential safety, of a known, non-threatening presence. He bolted. Driven by an instinct he couldn't comprehend, he streaked across the asphalt, a flicker of orange under the buzzing light, dodging potholes, and aimed straight for the house, with the warm, yellow glow spilling from the living room window. He reached the weathered wooden door and, balancing on his hind legs, scratched frantically, letting out a series of insistent, high-pitched meows, a sound born of instinct, fear, and an urgency he couldn't name. This was the inciting incident, not a conscious decision to get help, but an instinctive reaction, a flight towards the nearest known source of potential stability in the face of profound environmental distress. Martha Albright lowered her knitting, peering over the rim of her spectacles. What in the world? She lived alone in the small bungalow she'd shared with her husband, George, until his passing 3 years prior. The nights were the longest, filled with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She wasn't lonely, exactly. She kept busy with her garden, her books, her weekly bridge club, but she was accustomed to quiet. This sound, a frantic scratching accompanied by insistent, almost desperate meowing, was unusual. She rarely had visitors this late. Setting her knitting aside, she padded to the front door, her hand automatically going to the security chain George had insisted on installing. She peered through the peephole. An orange cat, skinny and looking thoroughly agitated, was plastered against her door, scratching relentlessly. She recognized it vaguely, one of the strays that sometimes haunted the neighborhood, though this one rarely ventured so close. Normally, they kept their distance, snatching the occasional offering she left out near the back fence and vanishing like smoke. "Well, hello there," she said through the door, her voice soft. "What's got you so worked up, little fellow?" The cat paused its scratching, looked up towards her voice, and let out another series of sharp, pleading meows. It wasn't the usual sound of a cat wanting food. It carried a different, more urgent register. Martha hesitated. It was late, dark. Opening the door to a potentially distressed animal wasn't necessarily wise. But the sheer persistence of the cat, the frantic energy radiating from it even through the solid wood, gnawed at her. She undid the chain. As soon as the door cracked open, the cat didn't try to dart inside. Instead, it backed up a few steps onto the porch, meowed loudly again, then turned and ran to the edge of the steps, looking back at her expectantly. It repeated the action, darting back to the door, meowing, running to the steps, looking back. All right, I'm coming," Martha sighed, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. This was odd. She grabbed her heavy cardigan from the hook by the door and slipped her feet into sturdy walking shoes. "Just let me get a flashlight." The cat waited impatiently, pacing on the sidewalk as she fumbled with the flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky yellow path across her lawn. "Lead the way, then," she murmured, stepping out into the cool night air. The cat immediately trotted ahead, staying just within the flashlight's beam, glancing back frequently to ensure she was following. It moved with purpose, heading not down the residential street, but straight across, towards the poorly lit expanse of the strip mall parking lot. Martha felt a growing sense of dread. The parking lot had always felt a bit neglected, unwelcoming after dark. Why would the cat lead her there? Was it injured? Had it cornered something? As they crossed the empty road and stepped onto the cracked asphalt, the cat slowed, its movements becoming more cautious, hesitant. It stopped near the dumpster enclosure, melting back slightly into the shadows cast by the hulking container, but its eyes remained fixed on a spot near the base. It let out a low, guttural sound, almost a growl. Martha swept the flashlight beam across the area. At first, she saw nothing but discarded trash, crumpled bags, stained cardboard, an overturned plastic cup. Then the light caught something pale against the grimy pavement. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. It was small, furry, unmoving. "Oh no," she whispered, the words barely audible. She knelt, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand, revealing the full, heartbreaking picture. A puppy, small, mostly white with dirty patches, lying in an unnatural sprawl. Dark stains marred its fur and the concrete beneath it. Its eyes were closed, its small chest utterly still. Tears welled instantly, blurring her vision. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the fur. Cold, so cold. There was no doubt. The little thing was gone. A wave of nausea and anger washed over her. Who could do this? Why? The sheer brutality of it, evident even in the aftermath, was staggering. She looked around the empty lot, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the buzzing light, the distant traffic hum, and the small silent witness, the orange cat, watching her from the shadows with wide, unblinking eyes. The first complication arose immediately. What now? Call the police? Report it? It was a stray puppy, beaten to death in a parking lot. Would they even investigate? Would it make any difference? The futility felt crushing. Yet, leaving it here felt wrong, an act of profound disrespect to the small life so cruelly extinguished. She couldn't save it, but she couldn't just walk away. The second complication was practical. She couldn't leave it here. She looked down at the puppy, then back at her house across the street. It wasn't far. She made a decision, fueled by a blend of sorrow and a stubborn refusal to let the cruelty have the last word. She gently, carefully, scooped the small, limp body into her arms. It weighed almost nothing. She cradled it against her cardigan, trying to shield it, though it was far too late for protection. As she stood up, the orange cat emerged fully from the shadows. It didn't approach her directly, but fell into step a few paces behind her. As she began the slow walk back across the parking lot, the flashlight beam guiding her path. It followed her across the street, up her walkway, and waited silently on the porch as she carried her sad burden inside. The weight in her arms was small, but the weight in her heart felt immense. The cat's presence, a silent, watchful shadow, added another layer of complexity. Why had it fetched her? And why was it still here? Back inside the warm stillness of her house, Martha gently laid the puppy's body on some old newspapers spread on the kitchen floor. The harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen revealed the extent of the small creature's suffering more clearly than the flickering sodium lamp outside. Bruises were already darkening beneath the thin fur, and a trickle of dried blood marked the corner of its mouth. Martha's hand shook as she averted her eyes. The image threatened to imprint itself permanently behind her eyelids. She stood there for a long moment, the grandfather clock ticking loudly in the silence. The initial shock was receding, replaced by a cold, weary anger and a profound sense of sorrow. Her instinct was still to call someone, to report this atrocity. She picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the non-emergency number for the local police department she kept taped to the wall. But she hesitated. What would she say? I found a dead puppy in the parking lot? They'd likely refer her to animal control. And what would animal control do? Collect the body, dispose of it. An anonymous end for an anonymous victim. No justice, no answers, just paperwork and weary sighs from overworked officials dealing with countless instances of neglect and cruelty every day. It felt inadequate, pointless even. The man responsible was long gone, likely untraceable. An official report wouldn't undo the violence, wouldn't bring the puppy back. It wouldn't alleviate the sickening feeling in her gut. She put the phone down. Right now, official channels felt cold, bureaucratic, and utterly incapable of addressing the intimate horror of what lay on her kitchen floor. What felt necessary, what felt right, was something else entirely. Dignity, a final small act of care in the face of ultimate carelessness. She wouldn't let this little life end on cold concrete next to a dumpster. She thought of her garden, the patch beneath the old maple tree where generations of beloved family pets lay buried. Skipper the terrier, Mittens the calico, even George's grumpy old bulldog Winston. It was peaceful there, shaded and quiet. This decision marked a turning point. Martha moved from simply reacting to the horror she'd discovered to taking proactive personal responsibility for its aftermath. It wasn't about finding the perpetrator anymore. It was about honoring the victim, however small and unknown. It was about asserting compassion in the small sphere where she could make a difference. She found an old, soft towel, one she kept for cleaning rags, and gently wrapped the puppy in it. Then she went to the back door. The orange cat was sitting patiently on the welcome mat, as if it had known she wouldn't be long. It looked up at her, its green eyes seeming to hold an unnerving depth of understanding in the dim porch light. "You still here?" Martha murmured, her voice thick. The cat blinked slowly. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a spade from the small garden shed attached to the garage. The night air was cool and damp as she walked toward the maple tree at the far end of her yard. The cat followed, keeping a respectful distance but never taking its eyes off her. Digging the small grave was hard work. The ground was cool, slightly resistant, and her arms ached quickly. Each spadeful of earth felt heavy, symbolic. She wasn't just digging a hole, she was excavating her own grief, not just for the puppy, but for George, for the general cruelty of the world, for the vulnerability of innocent creatures. The cat sat nearby, a silent orange sentinel beneath the spreading branches of the maple. It watched her work, its presence oddly comforting. It wasn't just a stray anymore. It was a witness, a fellow mourner, the catalyst who had brought her here. When the hole was deep enough, she gently placed the towel-wrapped bundle inside. She stood for a moment, head bowed, whispering a few simple words of farewell, a quiet apology for the cruelty the world had shown it. Then, slowly, methodically, she filled the grave back in, tamping the earth gently with the back of the spade. She found a smooth, flat stone near the flower bed and placed it on top as a simple marker. Straightening up, weary to her bones, she looked at the cat. It hadn't moved. As she turned to walk back towards the house, it rose and walked beside her, brushing lightly against her leg for just a moment before settling back on the porch mat. Inside, Martha washed her hands, the soap and water doing little to cleanse the deeper stain of the night's events. She looked at the cat through the glass pane of the back door. It curled up on the mat, tucking its paws beneath its chest, seemingly settling in for the night. A stray cat, bringing her to a scene of horror, and then staying. It didn't make logical sense, but as she looked at the small, resilient creature, a new realization dawned. The cat wasn't just a witness, it was a survivor, like her. It had navigated the same darkness, felt the same wrongness, and sought out her. Not just for food, perhaps, but for something else. Safety? Connection. In that moment, her focus shifted subtly but significantly. The horror of the puppy's death was still raw, but now, intertwined with it, was the quiet presence of the cat. She made another decision, less about the past and more about the present. "All right," she whispered to the closed door. "You can stay, at least for tonight." She fetched an old cushion and placed it on a sheltered corner of the porch, along with a small bowl of water. It was a point of no return. She was no longer just observing the stray. She was actively offering sanctuary. She had taken responsibility, not just for the dead, but now, tentatively, for the living. The next morning, the orange cat was still there, curled tightly on the cushion Martha had put out. He blinked sleepily as she opened the back door, stretched languidly, but made no move to run. Tentatively, Martha put down a small saucer of milk, an old-fashioned offering she knew wasn't ideal, but it was all she had readily available besides water. The cat approached cautiously, sniffed the milk, and began to lap it up, keeping one wary eye on her. Thus began a slow, delicate dance of trust-building. Martha started leaving out proper cat food and fresh water daily. She spoke to him softly as she worked in her garden, never pushing, never trying to touch him unless he initiated contact, which, for the first few days, he did not. She decided to stick with the name Rusty, fitting his patchy coat and the slightly weathered look about him. Rusty, for his part, remained mostly aloof but persistently present. He'd spend hours dozing on the porch railing, watching the street, or exploring the perimeter of her yard with the quiet confidence of a creature claiming new territory. He never strayed far. The memory of the parking lot incident lingered heavily between them, an unspoken trauma. Loud noises, a car backfiring, a slammed door, even the rumble of the garbage truck would send Rusty scrambling for cover, his fur bristling, eyes wide with panic. Martha found herself becoming hyper-aware of these sounds too, flinching in sympathy, her hand often going to her chest where the ache of remembered horror still resided. She'd murmur soothing words towards his hiding place, usually under the dense foliage of the azalea bushes, until he felt safe enough to emerge again. His trauma mirrored her own quiet anxieties. The brutal, senseless violence she had witnessed felt like a tear in the fabric of her safe, orderly world. She found herself locking her doors earlier, double-checking the windows, peering more cautiously into the darkness before stepping outside. The world felt less predictable, more menacing. She thought about the man in the truck, his face obscured by shadow and rage. Would he ever face consequences? Doubtful. Driven by a lingering sense of civic duty and perhaps a need to do something more concrete, Martha did eventually call the non-emergency line for animal services. She explained what she had found, omitting the cat's role in the discovery, simply stating she'd come across the deceased puppy in the parking lot and had buried it in her yard. The woman on the other end was polite, but sounded weary, overworked. She took down the information, sighed audibly, and thanked Martha for handling the burial. "Happens more than you'd think, ma'am," she'd said, a statement that offered no comfort, only a bleak confirmation of the world's casual cruelties. There was no mention of investigation, no follow-up, just a report filed away, another statistic. The call left Martha feeling hollow, reinforcing her earlier decision that personal action, however small, was more meaningful than relying on an indifferent system. Her attention turned more fully to Rusty. He was still painfully thin, his coat dull. She researched local vets, wondering about getting him checked out, neutered, vaccinated. But the potential cost was a concern on her fixed income. More than that, though, was a nagging fear. What if the vet found something terribly wrong? What if taking him in meant he'd be taken away? He was still technically a stray wild in his own way, and despite his aloofness, his consistent presence had become a quiet anchor in her days. The thought of the house falling silent again, the porch empty, was surprisingly painful. This internal conflict came to a head one rainy afternoon. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing steadily closer. Martha watched Rusty from the kitchen window. He was huddled on the porch cushion, looking increasingly anxious, his ears twitching, head scanning the sky. As the first heavy drops began to fall, punctuated by a loud clap of thunder directly overhead, Rusty bolted. Not for the azalea bushes this time, but in sheer panic, he scrambled at the back door, scratching frantically, just as he had that first night. Martha quickly opened the door. Rusty shot inside like an orange blur, diving under the kitchen table, trembling violently. Martha's heart ached for him. This wasn't just fear of a storm. This was the deep-seated terror of sudden, overwhelming noise, a direct echo of the violence he'd witnessed. Kneeling slowly, she spoke to him in low, calming tones. "It's okay, Rusty. You're safe here. It's just thunder." He remained hidden, a low, distressed sound rumbling in his chest. She stayed there near the table, not crowding him, just offering her quiet presence. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows, thunder shaking the old house. Inside, the air was thick with shared fear. This was her dark night of the soul. Not a crisis of faith, but a confrontation with vulnerability, his and her own. Could she truly offer this traumatized creature the safety he needed? Was her quiet life enough? The memory of the puppy, cold and still on the concrete, flashed through her mind. She couldn't save that life, but maybe, just maybe, she could save this one. Not from death, but from a life lived solely in fear, on the margins. She had to try. She had to be his sanctuary. The final preparations weren't physical, but emotional. A steeling of her resolve, a commitment made not just for the night, but for whatever time they had left. The storm raged on, each clap of thunder eliciting a renewed tremor from Rusty beneath the kitchen table. Martha remained nearby, sitting on the floor, leaning against the cabinets, speaking softly. She didn't try to force him out, didn't reach for him. She simply shared the space, a calm presence in the midst of the auditory chaos. "It's just noise, Rusty," she murmured, repeating the phrase like a mantra. "Loud noise, but it can't hurt you in here. You're safe." Rain hammered against the roof and windows, creating a cacophony that seemed to amplify the fear radiating from the small animal. Hours seemed to pass, measured in thunderclaps and the frantic rhythm of Rusty's breathing. Martha's legs grew stiff, her back ached, but she didn't move. She knew this was more than just comforting a scared cat through a storm. It was a culmination, a test of the fragile bond they had formed. It was the confrontation with the echoes of that night in the parking lot, the terror that sudden, explosive violence leaves in its wake. Finally, as the storm began to subside, the thunder receding into distant rumbles, Rusty's trembling lessened. He poked his head out from under the table, his green eyes wide, scanning the room. He looked at Martha, still sitting patiently on the floor. He let out a soft, questioning meow. "See?" Martha said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's passing. We're all right." Slowly, cautiously, Rusty crept out from his hiding place. He didn't bolt for the door or another hiding spot. Instead, he walked directly towards Martha. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed his head firmly against her knee, a low purr starting deep in his chest, vibrating against her leg. Tentatively, Martha reached down and stroked his back. He didn't flinch. He leaned into her touch, arching his back slightly, the purr growing louder, a rumbling sound of profound relief and perhaps acceptance. He stayed there, pressed against her, purring loudly as the last vestiges of the storm faded away. In that quiet moment, amidst the lingering smell of rain and damp earth, the true climax occurred. It wasn't a fight or a chase, but an act of profound trust, given and received. Martha had faced her own feelings of helplessness and the world's indifference by choosing sustained compassion. Rusty, scarred by trauma, had finally accepted sanctuary, choosing vulnerability and connection over perpetual fear. The ghost of the parking lot hadn't been banished, but its power had been diminished by the simple, persistent presence of care. Martha knew, stroking the now calm cat, that she wasn't alone in her quiet house anymore, and Rusty knew unequivocally that he was finally home. In the weeks and months that followed, a comfortable routine settled over the small house on Maple Avenue. Rusty became less of a porch fixture and more of an indoor companion, though Martha always left the back door slightly ajar during the day, respecting his innate need for the option of freedom, even if he rarely took it for long anymore. He claimed the worn armchair opposite Martha's knitting chair as his own, often napping there while she read or watched her evening programs. Martha made an appointment with the kindest, oldest vet in town, Dr. Adams. Rusty endured the checkup, the vaccinations, and the neutering surgery with a stoic dignity, seeming to understand, perhaps, that Martha's gentle reassurances meant no harm would come to him. He filled out, his coat growing thicker and gaining a healthy sheen. The haunted look in his eyes softened, replaced by a calm curiosity, though sudden loud noises could still make him jump. The house felt different, warmer. The silence was no longer empty but companionable, punctuated by the soft thump of Rusty jumping onto a chair, the rhythmic sound of his purring, or the quiet pad of his paws on the hardwood floor. Martha found herself talking to him constantly, narrating her day, sharing her thoughts, confiding worries she hadn't voiced even to her bridge partners. He was an excellent listener, offering only a slow blink or a soft meow in response, which was often exactly what she needed. Sometimes, while working in the garden, her gaze would drift to the smooth, flat stone beneath the maple tree. The sadness was still there, a dull ache for the life that never had a chance. But it was mingled now with a quiet sense of peace. She hadn't been able to prevent the cruelty, but she had refused to let it be the final word. She had offered dignity in death and sanctuary in life. One crisp autumn evening, Martha sat in her chair, knitting, while Rusty dozed in his armchair opposite her. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the room. Outside, the world hurried on with its usual indifference, its potential for both casual cruelty and unexpected kindness. But inside the small house, a quiet pact had been fulfilled. A lonely woman had found companionship, and a traumatized stray had found safety. They had faced the darkness together, the woman and the cat brought together by tragedy, and had emerged into a shared space of quiet warmth, proving that compassion, however small, could indeed flicker and thrive, even after the deepest night. This was their new normal, a testament to the resilience of kindness, in a world that often seemed to forget its value.